He wanted freedom, not diapers. But 2 years later, the millionaire CEO saw her, with 3 little girls who looked just like him. Garrett Sloan had always lived by one rule: never let emotions interfere with logic. From the outside, he seemed to have everything: power, wealth, influence, and the kind of cold precision that turned people into legends in the business world. Every decision he made was deliberate, every move calculated. But the moment Lily stood before him in his office, her hands trembling and her eyes full of both fear and hope, that control began to crack. Her voice was soft, almost breaking as she said the words that would change everything: "I'm pregnant." He froze, not from shock, but from the overwhelming wave of panic that he refused to show. It was as if someone had stripped away the armor he'd built his entire life to wear. In the silence that followed, the ticking of his expensive watch seemed deafening. He tried to reason, to organize, to categorize what this meant: responsibility, distraction, loss of freedom. He thought about investors, board meetings, press headlines. He thought about how easily affection could become a weakness. And then, without fully understanding why, he said the words that would haunt him for years. "I want freedom, not diapers." He didn't yell, he didn't argue, he just spoke with the detached certainty of a man who believed logic could save him from chaos. Lily didn't cry, not in front of him. She simply nodded, her lips trembling as she whispered, "I understand." But he saw it, that flicker in her eyes, like something inside her had shattered. She left quietly, closing the door behind her, and the sound of it was sharper than any argument they'd ever had. Garrett stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space where she had been, trying to convince himself that he'd done the right thing. Yet for some reason, that night, when he went home to his penthouse overlooking the city, he couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, the disappointment, the pain, and that quiet strength that once drew him to her. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, staring out the window, watching the city lights blur as the rain began to fall. Freedom. That was what he wanted, wasn't it? No attachments, no chaos, no vulnerability. But why, then, did the silence feel so heavy? In the weeks that followed, he buried himself in work. He traveled from city to city, closed multi-million-dollar deals, expanded his empire, and filled every second of his day with motion, noise, and purpose. But the more he succeeded, the emptier he felt. Every now and then, he'd glance at his phone, half expecting a message that never came. He told himself she had moved on, that it was better this way. Yet something inside him, a voice he couldn't silence, whispered that he had just destroyed the one thing that wasn't for sale. When his assistant mentioned that Lily had resigned and left the city, he only nodded. He didn't ask where she went, though part of him burned to know. Instead, he stood by his window again that night, the city spread out before him, a kingdom built on his own loneliness. Months turned into years, and Garrett perfected the art of pretending. The world saw a man who had everything under control, but inside, he carried a quiet, invisible ache. Every now and then, in the faces of strangers, he thought he saw a trace of her, the curve of a smile, the flash of blue eyes that reminded him of everything he'd thrown away. He'd look away quickly, forcing the thought down, telling himself that emotions were dangerous. But even he couldn't ignore the truth forever. Deep down, Garrett Sloan knew he had made the biggest mistake of his life, and though he didn't know it yet, fate was already preparing the moment that would make him face it. 2 years had passed since that night, and Garrett Sloan's life had only grown larger, louder, and more hollow. His company had doubled in size, his name appeared in business magazines almost weekly, and his presence commanded every room he entered. Yet, when the applause faded and the lights dimmed, there was nothing but silence waiting for him. He would walk into his penthouse at the top of the glass tower he had built, surrounded by the city skyline he once found intoxicating, and realize how empty victory could feel. He ate alone, worked alone, and slept in a bed that had grown too big. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, he would wake up without knowing why, his heart pounding as though he had heard a voice calling his name. But there was never anyone there. Only the hum of the city below, and the faint echo of a decision that had never stopped haunting him. He tried to drown the feeling in work. His days began before dawn, full of calls, meetings, strategy sessions, and plans that filled every hour until exhaustion forced him to stop. People admired him for his focus, for his control, for his unstoppable drive. They didn't know that what looked like ambition was, in truth, punishment. Every deal closed, every success announced, felt like a layer of armor protecting him from the regret he refused to face. But sometimes, when he caught his reflection in the glass wall of a conference room, he didn't see the man the world saw. He saw someone older than his years, someone who had traded warmth for stability, love for reputation, and meaning for power. He would straighten his tie, lift his chin, and move on as if the moment had never happened. There were nights when he would drive through the quiet streets of the city with no destination in mind. The chauffeur offered to take him home, but he preferred to be alone. Sometimes he would stop near the river, watching the reflections of lights ripple on the water, wondering if Lily still thought about him. He tried not to picture her face, yet it came to him anyway, those soft blue eyes, the way her smile always reached them, the way she laughed when she thought no one was listening. He told himself she had found someone better, someone who wanted the life he couldn't give her. The thought should have brought relief, but instead, it left an ache deep in his chest that no success could silence. One morning, he overheard two employees whispering outside his office about someone who had recently moved back to town. A name slipped out, Lily Bennett. His pen froze mid-signature. For the first time in years, he lost focus. His assistant asked if something was wrong, but he only nodded, pretending to be fine. The rest of the day blurred by in fragments. He sat through meetings without hearing a word, his thoughts circling around that single name like a storm. Was it her? Could it really be her? He told himself it didn't matter, that it shouldn't matter, but by evening, he knew he was lying to himself. That night, as he poured himself a drink, Garrett caught sight of his reflection again. The man in the glass looked powerful but tired, rich but restless. He realized that freedom, the thing he had once valued above all else, had become a prison. The life he had built was everything he thought he wanted, yet without her, it meant nothing. Somewhere out there, Lily was living her life, perhaps with someone else, perhaps with a child who might even look a little like him. The thought hit him like a blade. For a brief moment, he imagined what it would have been like if he hadn't pushed her away. If he had held her hand instead of turning his back. If he had chosen love over fear. But he pushed the thought aside as quickly as it came. Garrett Sloan didn't believe in what if. He believed in results, in control, in moving forward. Still, as he stood there looking out over the glittering city, the hollow truth pressed against his chest like a weight. For all his power, all his freedom, all his success, he had never felt more trapped. It was an unusually warm afternoon when Garrett decided to leave the office earlier than usual, something he hadn't done in years. The meetings had gone smoothly, investors were satisfied, and yet, he felt nothing. He told his driver to stop by the park, a place he hadn't visited since his youth, when things were simpler and the world still felt full of possibilities. As he stepped out of the car, the scent of blooming flowers mixed with the distant sound of laughter carried through the air, soft and pure in a way that struck him unexpectedly. He walked along the path lined with trees, his mind restless and strangely empty, until a burst of giggles caught his attention. It was the sound of children playing. He looked over toward the open field near the fountain, where sunlight danced across the grass, and then he saw them. 3 little girls, identical in every way, brown curls bouncing in the wind, bright eyes the color of warm honey, their small hands clutching each other as they ran across the grass. They were laughing, building a little castle out of sand and twigs, their joy uncontainable and free. Garrett felt something twist deep inside him, something unfamiliar and old, a strange pull that made him take a step closer without even realizing it. Then, just beyond them, he saw her. Lily. She was sitting on a wooden bench beneath the shade of a large oak tree, her posture calm, her gaze steady as she watched the children with a faint, tired smile. Her hair was longer now, curling slightly at the ends, and the wind caught strands of it, brushing them across her face. She looked softer but stronger, more grounded than he remembered, and yet the sight of her hit him like a punch to the chest. His breath caught as the world seemed to fade around her, leaving only the woman he had pushed away, and the 3 small lives that somehow felt tethered to the ache in his heart. He couldn't move for a long moment, it was as if his body had forgotten how. Then one of the girls turned toward him, her laughter fading into curiosity. When their eyes met, Garrett's heart stopped. Her eyes, blue, impossibly familiar, were his. A rush of disbelief and realization crashed over him so hard he had to take a step back. The other 2 girls turned too, all of them blinking up at him with the same mix of innocence and recognition that made his stomach drop. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. He had spent years convincing himself that the past was behind him, that Lily was just another chapter closed, but now he saw her sitting there with those children, and every wall he'd built began to crumble. Lily noticed his gaze then. She looked up slowly, her expression freezing when she saw him. For a second, neither of them moved. The noise of the park faded away until it was only the 2 of them, locked in a silence heavy with everything left unsaid. Garrett took a few hesitant steps forward, his heart pounding painfully against his ribs. He wanted to say her name, but it caught in his throat. She didn't smile, didn't frown, she simply watched him, wary, uncertain, as if seeing a ghost. Finally, he managed a strained whisper. Lily. Her lips parted, and for a moment, he saw the flicker of emotion behind her calm exterior, surprise, fear, something else he couldn't name. He glanced again at the children, at their small faces so alive and bright, and the question rose in him like a storm he couldn't contain. Are they? He couldn't finish the sentence, afraid of the answer. She looked at him, her jaw tightening slightly before she gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Ours. The word shattered him. It was quiet, almost fragile, but it landed with the weight of 1,000 regrets. His legs felt weak as he sank onto the bench beside her, though she shifted slightly, keeping space between them. He stared at the girls playing, laughter echoing in the distance, and tried to process what he was seeing. He had daughters, 3 of them, and he had never even known. The realization tore through him, filling him with guilt so heavy he could barely breathe. All the nights he had told himself he'd made the right choice, all the years he had buried his emotions under ambition and control, it all felt meaningless now. He turned toward Lily, his voice trembling. Why didn't you tell me? She exhaled slowly, her eyes never leaving the children. You made it very clear you didn't want to be part of this, Garrett. I respected that. Her tone wasn't bitter or cold, it was calm, final, like someone who had long accepted the pain she carried. He wanted to argue, to tell her she should have called him, should have given him a chance, but deep down, he knew the truth. He had driven her away. He had chosen freedom over love, and this was the cost. The laughter of the children floated back toward them, and Garrett felt tears sting the corners of his eyes, but he blinked them away. He had no right to cry, no right to feel wronged. For the first time in his life, he didn't know what to say, what to do, or how to fix something. All he could do was sit there, watching the sunlight glint in the hair of 3 little girls who shared his eyes, and realized that freedom had never been what he truly wanted. Garrett could barely focus as he sat across from Lily at the small cafe near the park. The clinking of coffee cups and soft hum of conversation around them faded into nothing as he tried to steady his breathing. He couldn't stop glancing toward the window, where the 3 little girls were sitting with a babysitter at a table outside, coloring and laughing as if the world were a perfect place. Every sound they made, every smile they shared, was a knife of guilt twisting deeper inside him. He had missed everything: their first words, their first steps, their birthdays. He had missed years that could never be returned, and there was nothing he could do to change that. His voice, when it finally came, sounded rough and unfamiliar. "You should have told me." Lily looked at him, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup, her posture calm but guarded. "And what would you have done, Garrett? You made it very clear what you wanted back then." Her tone wasn't angry, just tired, like someone who had carried this conversation 1,000 times in her head. He tried to find an answer, but his mind was a storm of regret and shame. He remembered his exact words from that night, the coldness with which he'd told her he wanted freedom, not diapers. It sounded crueler now than it ever had before, echoing in his mind like a curse. He rubbed his temples and exhaled, trying to find something, anything, to say that would make it right. "I was wrong," he admitted quietly. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought." He stopped, unable to finish. She didn't interrupt. She just sat there, looking at him with those same blue eyes that used to see through every wall he built. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick with years of silence and words that had never been said. When Lily finally spoke again, her voice was soft but steady. "It wasn't easy, Garrett. I had to move away, find a new job, take care of 3 babies alone. There were nights I didn't know how I would make it. But then I'd look at them, and somehow, I'd find the strength." Her eyes glistened, but she blinked the tears away. "They're my whole world. I never wanted to hide them from you, but I couldn't risk bringing that pain back into our lives." He wanted to reach across the table, to take her hand, to say he was sorry in a way that meant something. But he didn't. He didn't know if he even had the right to touch her anymore. The waitress came and refilled their cups, but neither of them noticed. Garrett's gaze drifted again to the window, to the girls who were now showing each other their drawings. One of them held up a paper where she'd drawn 3 stick figures holding hands. He felt something break inside him. "They're beautiful," he whispered. Lily smiled faintly, the first hint of warmth in her expression. "They are. And smart. And stubborn. Just like you." He couldn't help but let out a weak laugh, but the sound was hollow. He leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "I don't even know their names," he said quietly. Lily looked at him for a long moment, then finally answered. "Sophie, Emma, and Claire." Hearing their names made something in his chest tighten. He repeated them under his breath, as if trying to memorize them. There was a silence after that, one that felt almost peaceful despite the weight between them. The years they had lost couldn't be undone, but for the first time in a long while, Garrett felt something other than emptiness. It was guilt, yes, but also longing, a desperate hope that maybe it wasn't too late to try. "I want to know them," he said suddenly. "If you'll let me. I won't push, I want to be there, even if it's just a little." Lily looked at him skeptically, but her expression softened when she saw how serious he was. "You can't come and go when it's convenient, Garrett," she said quietly. "They've never had a father. I won't let anyone break their hearts." Her words hit him hard, but he nodded. "I understand. I wouldn't ask if I wasn't ready." He didn't even know if he believed himself completely, but he meant every word. Lily studied him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face for the man she once loved. She saw traces of him, the same intensity, the same quiet strength, but there was something different now, something softer behind the hard edges. She sighed, looking down at her cup. "We'll see," she murmured finally. Garrett nodded, not pushing for more. He knew he didn't deserve immediate forgiveness or trust. He would have to earn it, one moment at a time. As they left the cafe, the sunlight hit her hair and the girls' laughter filled the air again. Garrett stood a few steps behind, watching them walk ahead, feeling both an ache and a strange sense of peace. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about deals or deadlines. He was thinking about second chances. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but as he watched his daughters turn and wave at him with innocent smiles, he realized something with complete certainty: this time, he wasn't going to run. Garrett couldn't sleep that night. He sat in his study, the city glowing through the tall glass windows behind him, the noise of traffic muted by the height. He had gone over every detail of the day in his mind again and again: the cafe, the way Lily had looked at him, the sound of the girls laughing, the way one of them had taken his hand without hesitation, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. That touch had undone him in a way nothing else ever could. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about profit margins or negotiations. He was thinking about how he had missed bedtime stories, birthdays, scraped knees, and laughter that belonged to him. It made his chest ache, that realization that life had gone on without him, that something so perfect had existed while he was busy chasing an idea of freedom that had only left him hollow. The next morning, Garrett arrived at work early, but focus was impossible. He sat behind his massive desk, staring at spreadsheets and contracts, seeing instead three little faces smiling up at him. His assistant knocked gently before stepping in, giving him a quick rundown of the day's schedule, but he barely heard her. He interrupted mid-sentence, his voice distant, asking her to clear his afternoon. She hesitated, startled. He never cleared his schedule, but the look in his eyes made her nod without question. As soon as she left, he leaned back and exhaled slowly, closing his eyes. For once, business could wait. That afternoon, he found himself standing again in the park. The sun was shining, and laughter echoed through the open air. It took him only a moment to spot them: Lily sitting under the same oak tree, a book in her hands, her daughters playing nearby. He hesitated before approaching, not wanting to intrude, not wanting to break whatever fragile peace existed between them. But when one of the girls, Emma, he remembered, saw him, she ran toward him with a wide smile that made his heart stop. "You came back," she said brightly, her small hand grabbing his. Her innocence made something inside him crumble, and all he could do was nod, swallowing the lump in his throat. Lily looked up then, her expression softening for just a second before she closed her book and stood. "Garrett," she said quietly, walking over. There was no anger in her voice this time, only a cautious calm. "You didn't have to come." He shook his head, unable to stop himself from smiling faintly. "I wanted to." For a moment, the silence between them was heavy, but not hostile. The girls ran around them, giggling, their laughter weaving into the breeze, and Garrett found himself watching them with awe. It felt unreal to see pieces of himself in each of them: the same eyes, the same stubborn glint when they fought over a toy, the same determination when they tried to build something out of sticks and leaves. He looked back at Lily. "You did this all alone," he said quietly. She gave a small shrug, though he could see the pride and pain hidden behind her calm expression. "I didn't have a choice. They needed me." He wanted to say something, to apologize, but she cut him off gently. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty, Garrett. What's done is done. The only thing that matters now is them. Her gaze softened as she watched the girls. They deserve stability. They deserve love. I don't want to confuse them. He nodded, understanding, though the words stung. I'm not going anywhere, he said firmly. I know I don't have the right to ask for much, but I want to earn a place in their lives. She studied him for a long time, trying to read him, to see if this was the same man she once knew. What she saw surprised her. There was no arrogance now, no indifference, only sincerity and something she hadn't seen before in his eyes, humility. They spent the next hour together, watching the girls play, talking quietly about small things, their favorite foods, the schools nearby, the things that made them laugh. Garrett listened to every word, memorizing the details as if they were pieces of a puzzle he was desperate to complete. When Sophie fell and scraped her knee, he instinctively rushed forward before Lily could move. He crouched beside her, speaking softly, his voice gentle in a way that startled even himself. The little girl sniffled, then smiled as he handed her a tissue and said, "You're brave, just like your mom." When he looked up, Lily was watching him with a strange expression, something between disbelief and something deeper she tried to hide. As the sun began to set, Lily gathered the girls, preparing to leave. Garrett walked them to their car, each step feeling both heavy and light at the same time. When the girls waved goodbye, shouting, "See you soon," from the back seat, he felt warmth spread through him, a kind of happiness he hadn't known in years. Lily stood by the car door, hesitating. "You can come by tomorrow," she said finally, her voice low but steady. "If you want to." Garrett met her eyes, and for the first time in a long while, he smiled, not the polite, practiced smile he used in boardrooms, but something real. "I want to." As he watched the car drive away, the sound of their laughter echoing faintly, Garrett realized that something inside him had shifted forever. For years, he had measured success by power, wealth, and control. But none of it meant anything compared to the few hours he'd just spent with them. He looked up at the fading light, a sense of clarity settling in his chest. He couldn't change the past, but maybe, just maybe, he could build something better now. Something real. Garrett's visits became a quiet routine over the following weeks, something that started as tentative moments and slowly grew into something steady and real. Every afternoon after work, instead of heading to the bar with his colleagues or reviewing endless contracts, he found himself driving to the park, to Lily's apartment, or to the little daycare the girls attended. At first, the children regarded him with the kind of polite curiosity they might give to a stranger, but gradually that curiosity turned into warmth. They would run toward him with squeals of delight, their small hands tugging at his sleeves, begging him to play. He was awkward at first. He didn't know how to hold a jump rope, how to braid doll hair, or even how to read a bedtime story without sounding like he was giving a business presentation, but the girls didn't care. They laughed at his mistakes, corrected him, and included him anyway, their innocent acceptance breaking down walls he hadn't even realized were still standing. One evening, Lily invited him to dinner. It was simple: spaghetti, salad, and a bottle of wine that she'd probably been saving, but to Garrett, it felt like the most significant meal of his life. The small apartment was warm and full of laughter, the girls showing him their drawings while Lily cooked. He sat at the table, watching them, feeling something in his chest shift and expand in ways that frightened him. When Lily finally joined them, her hair loosely tied back, her cheeks flushed from the stove's heat, he couldn't take his eyes off her. She looked different from the woman he remembered, stronger, more grounded, but still impossibly beautiful. At one point, Sophie dropped her fork, and he bent down to pick it up. When he looked up, Lily's eyes met his, and for a moment, neither of them moved. It wasn't romantic or dramatic, it was something quieter, something that spoke of years lost and a longing that still lived beneath the surface. After dinner, when the girls went to bed, they sat together on the small balcony overlooking the street. The city lights flickered below them, and the hum of distant traffic filled the pauses in their conversation. Lily leaned against the railing, her expression thoughtful. "You're good with them," she said softly. Garrett gave a small laugh. "I'm learning," he admitted. "They make it easy." She smiled faintly, but her eyes stayed distant. "They've needed a father. I just never thought." Her voice trailed off, and he turned to look at her, sensing the weight of what she wasn't saying. "That I'd be here again?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer, but the silence was enough. He wanted to tell her that he had changed, that the man who once walked away because he feared responsibility was gone, but words felt empty compared to what he was trying to show her through his actions. Still, the guilt never left him. Sometimes, when the girls laughed, he'd feel a sharp pang in his chest, a reminder that he hadn't been there for their first laugh, their first word, their first birthday. He wanted to make up for it all, though he knew he never truly could. One night, after the girls had fallen asleep, he found himself standing in their room, watching them breathe softly in the dim glow of a nightlight shaped like a moon. Lily found him there, leaning against the doorframe, and for a long moment, they both just watched in silence. Then she said quietly, "They dream about you sometimes." "I can tell." He turned to her, startled. "What do you mean?" She gave a small, sad smile. "They didn't know who you were, but they used to ask why other kids had a daddy and they didn't. I told them theirs was far away, working hard. Maybe part of me hoped that was true." Her words hit him harder than he expected, and he had to look away, blinking against the sting in his eyes. "I was a coward," he said finally. "I thought I wanted freedom, but all I did was build walls around myself and call it success." She didn't respond, just watched him with an expression that was softer than before, full of understanding but also the faint echo of pain. "You can't change the past, Garrett," she said gently. "But you can decide what kind of man you want to be now." He nodded slowly, her words sinking deep into his chest. "I know," he whispered. "And I want to be someone they can be proud of. Someone you can trust." For a moment, she didn't move. Then, slowly, she reached out and touched his hand. It was a simple gesture, hesitant and fragile, but it carried more meaning than anything they had said. He turned his hand, fingers brushing against hers, and for the first time in years, something like peace settled between them. They stayed that way for a while, the silence comfortable, the night air cool against their skin. Somewhere inside the apartment, one of the girls murmured in her sleep, and Lily smiled faintly. Garrett looked at her, realizing just how much he had lost and how much he was finally starting to find again. That night, as he drove home, the city felt different, less like a battlefield and more like a place where life could start over. He looked up at the stars, thinking about the tiny apartment, the soft sound of children's laughter, and Lily's hand resting lightly in his. For the first time in his adult life, he wasn't chasing power or running from responsibility. He was running towards something real, something fragile, something worth everything he had to give. Garrett woke up before dawn, his thoughts already heavy with the same question that had haunted him for weeks: was he doing enough to make things right? He stood by the window of his penthouse, the skyline glowing faintly as the sun began to rise. His reflection in the glass looked like a stranger, a man who had spent his life chasing success, now brought to his knees by 3 small girls and the woman he once broke. He had built an empire but never a home. Now, for the first time, he wanted one. He wanted it with them. He wanted laughter in the mornings, tiny hands tugging on his sleeves, the smell of coffee and pancakes instead of the sterile silence of empty luxury. But wanting wasn't enough. He knew that trust wasn't something he could buy, not with gifts or promises. It had to be earned, piece by fragile piece, and the thought both terrified and humbled him. That afternoon, he drove to the girls' daycare with his heart pounding in his chest. It was his turn to pick them up, something Lily had agreed to only recently. When he arrived, the girls were outside playing in the garden. Sophie was drawing shapes in the dirt with a stick, Emma was chasing butterflies, and Claire sat quietly near a bench, watching them both. When she saw him, her whole face lit up. "Daddy," she cried, running toward him. The word froze him in place. It was the first time any of them had said it. He dropped to his knees, catching her in his arms, feeling the small weight of her body press against him. "What did you say?" he asked softly, his voice unsteady. She giggled and repeated it like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Daddy." Something inside him broke open then, every wall, every defense, every illusion that he could ever live without them. He held her tighter, his eyes closing as he whispered, "Yeah, sweetheart. I'm here." Later that day, when Lily arrived home from work, she found him sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by building blocks and dolls, the girls laughing around him as they tried to teach him how to braid hair. The sight stopped her cold. For a long moment, she just stood there, watching. The man who once walked away from the idea of fatherhood was now covered in stickers, with 3 giggling little girls climbing over him. He looked up when he noticed her, his expression open and unguarded. "You're early," he said with a sheepish smile. She leaned against the doorframe, unable to hide her amusement. "You look different," she said. He shrugged. "They said I needed to sparkle." He gestured at the glitter on his shirt, and the girls burst into laughter. The sound filled the room, echoing off the walls like a melody she hadn't realized she'd been missing. Something inside her softened. For the first time in a long while, the sight of him didn't make her heart ache, it made it warm. That evening, after the girls were asleep, they sat together in the quiet living room, the remains of dinner still on the table. The air between them was heavy but calm. Lily looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "They called you Daddy today," she said quietly. He froze, then nodded slowly. "Yeah. I didn't ask them to." She smiled faintly. "They wouldn't have if they didn't want to." She paused, her eyes studying his face. "You've changed, Garrett." He looked down at his hands, then back at her. "I had to. I can't undo what I did, but I can make sure I never walk away again." His voice was low but firm, every word carrying the weight of truth. Lily didn't respond immediately. She looked tired, not from him but from the years that had stretched between them, from all the battles she'd fought alone. "Do you ever think about what it could have been like if you'd stayed?" she asked finally. He let out a long breath. "Every day." There was silence after that, but it wasn't an empty one. It was full of all the words they hadn't said, the apologies that didn't need to be spoken aloud. Garrett leaned back, watching her as she brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You were right, you know," he said quietly. "About everything. I thought success was about power and control, but it's about love. About who you build your life with. And I threw that away." She met his gaze, her eyes soft but wary. "Maybe we both did," she said. "I stopped believing in second chances a long time ago." He smiled faintly. "Then let me prove you wrong." Days turned into weeks, and the fragile balance between them began to shift. Lily started to trust him again, not with words, but through small gestures, a text asking him to pick up the girls, an invitation to dinner, a quiet smile when their hands brushed as they passed each other a dish. Garrett never pushed. He simply showed up, again and again, until being there wasn't an effort but a habit. The girls thrived, their laughter becoming the soundtrack of his evenings. They painted together, read stories, and built pillow forts in the living room. Sometimes, Lily joined them, and in those moments, Garrett felt something he hadn't felt since he was a boy: contentment. One night, as he tucked the girls into bed, Sophie looked up at him sleepily and whispered, "Will you be here tomorrow?" He smiled and kissed her forehead. "Always." The word lingered in the air long after she'd closed her eyes. When he walked out into the hall, Lily was there, leaning against the wall, watching him. "You really mean that, don't you?" she asked quietly. He met her gaze and nodded. "With everything I have." She didn't answer right away, but as he turned to leave, she reached out and touched his arm lightly. "Stay for dinner tomorrow," she said softly. It wasn't much, but to him, it felt like the beginning of forgiveness. He left her apartment that night with a heart full of something unfamiliar: hope. The kind that didn't come from success or wealth, but from love earned the hard way. And as he drove through the quiet city streets, he realized that for the first time in years, he wasn't running from his past. He was finally building his future. Garrett woke up on a Sunday morning to the sound of laughter echoing faintly from the park outside his window. It had been months since that first afternoon in the park, months of slow healing and rebuilding, and yet it still felt new every single day. He got dressed quietly, grabbed the small bouquet of wildflowers he had picked up from a stand, and drove to Lily's place, feeling a mix of anticipation and peace that he hadn't felt in years. When he arrived, the girls were already on the porch, waiting for him like they always did. Emma spotted him first and shouted his name, her voice carrying through the crisp morning air. He barely had time to kneel before three small bodies collided into him, their arms wrapping tightly around his neck as if afraid he might disappear again. But he wasn't going anywhere, not this time, not ever again. Inside the apartment, Lily stood by the kitchen window, sunlight glinting off her hair as she poured coffee into 2 mugs. She turned when she heard the door and smiled, a small, genuine smile that still made his chest tighten. "You're early," she teased softly, handing him a cup. He took it, brushing her fingers accidentally, though he no longer pulled away from the contact like he used to. "Couldn't sleep," he admitted. "Too much quiet in that big place of mine." She raised an eyebrow but said nothing, just turned back to the counter and began slicing fruit for breakfast. He watched her, noticing how the light played on her face, how the girls' laughter filled the space that used to feel like a wound. This simple, ordinary morning, was more valuable to him than every deal he had ever closed. After breakfast, they all went to the park together. The girls chased each other through the grass, their giggles ringing through the air as Garrett and Lily sat side by side on a bench. For a long while, neither of them spoke. It wasn't uncomfortable anymore, silence between them had become something almost sacred. Finally, Lily broke it. "They love you, you know," she said, her eyes following the twins as they played. Garrett nodded slowly, his gaze soft. "I love them too. More than I thought I could love anything." He hesitated, his voice quieter when he continued. "And I love you, Lily. I never stopped. I just didn't know how to deserve you." She turned to him, surprise flickering across her face, but before she could respond, one of the girls tripped and cried out. Garrett was on his feet in an instant, running to her side. He lifted her gently, whispering reassurance until her tears stopped, his voice low and warm. When he carried her back to the bench, Lily's eyes were full of something new, not just forgiveness, but understanding. That evening, they returned home, tired but content. The girls fell asleep on the couch, curled together like small, dreaming angels. Garrett carried them one by one to their beds, lingering just long enough to brush a kiss across each tiny forehead. When he came back, Lily was standing by the window, looking out at the night. "You've changed," she said softly without turning around. "You're not the man who left." He stopped behind her, close enough to feel the faint warmth of her skin. "No," he said quietly. "That man thought love was a distraction. This one knows it's the only thing that matters." She turned then, her eyes shining in the dim light, and for the first time, she let herself really look at him, the man who had hurt her, and the man who had come back to make it right. "You're here now," she whispered. "That's what matters." They didn't need to say more. He stepped closer, his hand finding hers, fingers fitting together like they had always belonged there. Outside, the city was alive with sound and light, but in that small apartment, time seemed to slow. He realized then that redemption didn't come in grand gestures or dramatic apologies, it came in consistency, in showing up day after day, in loving without condition. Garrett had spent years building an empire of stone, but what truly made him feel alive again was this small, fragile kingdom of love he had almost lost. Weeks later, he sold his penthouse and moved into a smaller house closer to Lily's neighborhood. They spent weekends planting flowers in the yard, teaching the girls how to ride their bikes, baking messy cookies that filled the kitchen with laughter. Every once in a while, Garrett would catch Lily watching him with quiet affection, and each time it made him more determined never to take any of it for granted again. One afternoon, as they watched the sun set together from the porch, he reached for her hand. "Do you ever think about what we missed?" he asked softly. She smiled and leaned her head against his shoulder. "Sometimes. But then I look at what we have now, and I realize it's exactly how it was meant to be." He closed his eyes, letting her words sink into him like a promise. The past no longer haunted him, it had led him here, to them. As the sky turned from gold to violet, the girls ran toward them, laughing, calling their names. He opened his arms, and they crashed into him, all warmth and light and love. Garrett looked at Lily over their heads and smiled, a real, unguarded smile, the kind that spoke of everything they had survived and everything they still had ahead. And in that moment, surrounded by the only people who had ever truly mattered, he understood that his freedom hadn't been found in running from responsibility, it had been waiting for him in their embrace all along.